He is worshipped by way of his attributes, by our knowledge of his attributes. We worship him knowing that he is the most merciful. We worship him knowing that he knows whatever we think, whatever we have done. We worship him knowing that he is forgiving, that he has control over all things. Since everything which takes place in the universe is by his permission, then our worship should be directed to him. So this is how we worship God without trying to visualize him in any way, shape, or form. So for us, the Kaaba, the direction in which Muslims worship in Mecca, is not an object of worship.
The
true life of the Muslim starts at death. If you wish to enhance your knowledge of the Islamic perspective on the hereafter, this life doesn't go on forever. But we do so little to prepare for it because most of us don't know what happens after this life ends. If you want to be amongst those who know, then join us every Saturday at 1930 GMT for the inevitable journey.
The Kaaba, the direction in which Muslims worship in Mecca, is not an object of worship. And it is not an intermediary through which we worship God. Because it is possible to go to Mecca and worship inside of the Kaaba. And nobody who has an idol who he worships through will climb inside of his idol and start worshiping. Because if he does, then he's no longer worshiping his idol. He's somewhere else. He's going outside of the idol. So his worship, those who are involved in worship through idols, they will always have to have that idol visualized in front of them. They work through the idol, either in a picture or in the form of a statue or a human being or whatever. But nobody, it would be considered sacrilegious to go inside of the idol to worship. So from an Islamic perspective, the Kaaba is only a direction of worship. It focuses the direction for the organization of prayer. So people and mosques are lined up in that direction all over the world, which would appear, if one were to rise above the earth, as concentric circles from Mecca over the rest of the earth. So it's only a direction of worship. In fact, the Kaaba was broken down at one point in time. And the Prophet, may God's peace and blessing be upon him, informed us that in the future, it will be broken down again. As one of the signs of the last day, an individual will come, an Ethiopian will come, and he will smash it. It will be broken down. But worship will not cease. Worship will not cease. We do not have to have a picture of the Kaaba to worship. So it is only for the organization of worship and not an object of worship or an intermediary through which we worship. The other point concerning God in Islam, Allah, is that the term Allah, we do not necessarily hold to be the name of God in the sense that all other names are illegitimate. Allah is an Arabic term. So the Semitic languages, the ancient among them, whether it's Aramaic or Syriac or Amharic, etc., these ancient Semitic languages all refer to God as Allah. But if one finds, as I found when I visited Korea some years back, that the name which the Koreans had for God, Hanonim, which was the name they used before Christianity came there and before even Buddhism arrived there. It referred to God with attributes very similar to the attributes as God is described in Islam, then we would have to say that obviously the prophet who would have been sent there, because from Islamic beliefs, prophets were sent to all nations and tribes, that the prophet communicating the teachings of Islam to those people would have communicated it in their own language. As Allah said in the Quran that He only sent prophets speaking the language of the people, because the duty of the prophet is to convey. So that quite conceivably is a legitimate name for God. The only thing that we reject is where these names contain other meanings. Those other meanings we reject. But the pure meaning of God being the creator, sustainer of the universe, who is unique in His attributes, this is God, Allah, in whatever language you express it. The other point of misconception, and this arises amongst Christians with regards to Muslims, because of that historic struggle known as the Crusades, is that Muslims reject Jesus. And of course, when one goes to the Quran, the basic scripture of Islam, one finds otherwise. In fact, Jesus' name is mentioned more often in the Quran than Muhammad's. May God's peace and blessings be on both of them. It's not to say that Jesus is mentioned more times in the Quran than Muhammad. May God's peace and blessings be upon them. But that by name, Jesus is mentioned more often. In fact, we even have a chapter of the Quran named Maryam, Mary, the mother of Jesus. So, it is not true that Muslims reject Jesus, but they reject the concept of Jesus being God. This is what is rejected. The concept of Jesus being God or the Son of God. Son of God, which in Christian theology, in essence, means that Jesus was God. God became man and dwelt among men. This is what is rejected by Muslims. But the virgin birth of Jesus, which today many Christian theologians amongst the Protestants are rejecting. You know, you have many today who question and reject even Jesus' virgin birth. For Muslims, it is a point of belief. If a Muslim denies that Jesus was born from a virgin, he or she who denies it denies Islam, because they're denying the clear text of the Quran. So it is a point of faith for Muslims to believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. However, virgin birth from an Islamic perspective does not elevate Jesus to godhood, does not give him any aspect of divinity, because birth is a quality of creation, not the creator. Because once you're talking about birth, whether it's virgin or otherwise, you're talking about creation. You're no longer talking about God. So virgin birth does not indicate divinity. It's not evidence for divinity. As Allah in the Quran Himself states that the example of Jesus is that of Adam. Jesus is like Adam. Allah created them by the command, be, and they were. That is the bottom line. And we look at Jesus' creation by the Virgin Mary as being a completion of the modes by which human beings were created. There are 4 basic modes. Until the birth of Jesus, 3 existed. Human beings created without fathers or mothers. That was Adam. A human being created without a mother. That was Eve. Human beings created with fathers and mothers. That's humankind. And Jesus, a human being created without a father. This is only a completion of the modes of creation. Allah can create us as He wishes.
According to the Quran, we live in a universe that worships Allah. It is not just human beings who celebrate His praises, but animals as well. Join us every Wednesday at 20 GMT for your show, Even Animals Glorified.
The other misconception concerning Islam in terms of its beliefs is that Muslims are Arabs. Of course, in India, this is not so much of a misconception because Muslims are living right next to the rest of the population, and they realize that these people converted. But for much of the world, Muslims were referred to as Turks at one point in time. And in general today, as a result of media propaganda, Muslims are looked at as Arabs. So many Westerners think that Islam is concentrated in the Arab countries. However, we know that the largest Muslim country today is that of Indonesia. Over 200 million Muslims. And they are not Arabs. So, in fact, when you add up the Arabs with regards to the rest of the Muslims, they are only some 20-25% of the totality of Muslims. So, Arab and Islam are not synonymous. And this is something which came also out of the era of the PLO activities where terrorism was being attributed to Muslims, Arab names were used, Arabs, Islam, it became confused and deliberately confused in many cases, and this impression was given. So when people want to make cartoons, for example, about Muslims, they will use an Arab representative, having a big hooked nose and a gutra, as the Saudis wear. Usually this is how they want to depict Muslims. That's the general image that they will depict, a typical Arab from Arabia. With regards to practices, religious practices, one of the common expressions about Islam is that it was spread by the sword. And I know this idea is revived in India to a certain degree by certain elements, to give the impression that people became Muslims by force. However, the realities of India belie that. Muslims ruled India for how many hundreds of years, and the vast majority of Indians are not Muslims. If they were putting people to the sword, unless if they did not accept Islam, then you would not have found a non-Muslim in India. But this was not the case. Muslims ruled Spain for some 700 years also. And the vast majority of Spaniards did not become Muslims. Many did, but the vast majority did not. Where populations became Muslims en masse, this was by the choice of the people. Their lands were administered by Muslims. In the expansion of Islam from Arabia, but people accepted Islam by choice in the vast majority of cases. I'm not saying that we may not find somewhere, somehow, sometime, an instance in history where somebody forced somebody, but as a teaching of Islam, it is rejected. Allah states very clearly in the second chapter of the Quran, La ikraha fi din, that there is no compulsion in religion. One cannot force anyone. So it is against the fundamental teachings. If somebody did it, they did it in error. The next most common misconception is that Muslims have 4 wives. Polygamy. Especially for myself in the West, whenever people find out you're a Muslim, the first thing they ask you about is this 4 wives. Why 4 wives? This is the biggest issue. First and foremost, we have to clarify for those who have this idea that this is not something which Islam prescribes, meaning that every Muslim must have 4 wives. And actually, you might think, oh, nobody would think that. Yes, when I was in England about 6 months ago, I met one English brother who accepted Islam, and he had told me that he had wanted to accept Islam sometime before. But he loved his wife, you see, as he said. He said, I really love my wife, and I didn't want to marry anybody else. So he held back from accepting Islam, thinking that once he became a Muslim, he had to have 4 wives. Right? So, again, though it might seem quite funny to us, people have this misconception because Muslims are presented as having 4 wives. Now, what we have to point out for people is that having more than one wife is something which Islam did not invent. Islam did not bring polygamy onto the world scene when it did not exist before. Polygamy is a part of the history of mankind. You cannot find a corner of the earth in which the people have not practiced polygamy. And when I say polygamy, actually, the correct term is really polygyny. Because polygamy means having one wife, more than one wife, or more than one husband. Right? And really, from an Islamic perspective, it's only having more than one wife. Having more than one husband is called polyandry. And this is something which rarely happened in the history of human beings. The vast majority of cases, 99.99%, wherever you go on the face of the earth, people have been practicing polygamy. Even in the societies, the basis of Western civilization is Greece and Rome, Greco-Roman culture. And in Greece and Rome, the law was monogamy. It's true, that was the law. But in Greece and Rome, the majority of the population were slaves. The majority of the population were slaves. And the slave master had free access to any of the slave women he wanted. So though he was officially married to one, he was practicing polygamy. So even the so-called monogamy in the so-called monogamous societies, it didn't exist in the past. And it doesn't exist today in the present. In the West, which promotes itself as the upholders of monogamy, what we find in surveys taken in America is that well over 65% of American males have had sexual relations outside of marriage. Married people we're talking about. So what we find is that the majority are practicing polygamy. But it's called extramarital relations. They have another name for it, right? And by calling it extramarital relations, then one is not held responsible. You see, what happens is that women, especially the feminists, the feminist element, they look at polygamy as being the worst thing that could ever happen to women. And so they lead the frontal attack on Islam with this issue of polygamy. Polygamy is the oppression of women. But really, it is monogamy. that is the oppression of women. Because monogamy is not in force anywhere. And men make the laws. This is reality. Human society, men have made the laws. We have had a few women pop up here and there. Cleopatra, Indira Gandhi, others around the world, popping up for minutes. But who really ran the show? The men behind them. And men have made the laws. So this monogamy, which is instituted legally by males, is not to the advantage of females. Females think it is, but in fact it is not. Because what it does is it legitimizes polygamy unrestricted and without responsibility. Because a man in the West, for example, in America or in England, a man may have one wife and 10 mistresses. This is legal. It's not a crime. A wife and 10 mistresses. He has no responsibility to these mistresses, to look after them, to maintain them, all these other things. He doesn't. So he's free to have them at his leisure. It is only pleasure. There's no responsibility involved. So it is in his favor that he is not allowed to have more than one wife. Because that way the other women cannot demand of him anything. Because they're not his wife. Whereas Islam recognizes the nature of human beings. And that is to deal with the way in which Allah has created human society. That human beings, when we look at the populations around the world, women outnumber men, with the exception of China and India, where, unfortunately, there has been systematic genocide against females. Right? Whether it is midwives being paid to kill young girls at birth, which has been reported in India on a large scale, or in China, where people are only allowed to have one child and everybody wants a male. The females are aborted or whatever. So a change in demographics have taken place over the last decades. But all of the countries around the rest of the world, there is a surplus of females. A surplus of females resulting, one, from wars. From wars. Wars which are continually happening, which involve death to males. Violent crimes in society. Mostly it is males killing males. Even statistics in terms of birth, the number of children that die in the process of birth and in early stages of life, it is concentrated amongst males. And females live longer than males. If you go around the world and you add up all the people who are in their 90s, you will find that some 75 to 80% of them are females. Females live longer than males. Some people say it's due to stress and other things, but it's biological. Allah has created them that way. So Islam provided a means by which the surplus females in the vast majority of the society could be reintegrated in the society through legitimate marriage. Because females, as for the most part, have a desire to have relations with males. This is created in them, as it's created in males to have relationship with females. So either they're going to fulfill it legitimately, or it's going to be fulfilled illegitimately. This is why after World War II, when a huge portion of the male population in Germany was destroyed, German parliamentarians debated introducing polygamy. Unfortunately, the church was against it, strongly opposed to it. So it was never instituted. And what is the result? In Germany today, prostitution is legal. It is a legal profession. People are provided with work cards and medical benefits, everything. It is considered a profession like any other profession, prostitution. Something which is despised over the majority of the world, looked at as being something evil. But there it has become legal.